was down on the Baja coast. That was a lovely thing.
Everybody speaks English in Revolution.
Yeah, well, and the tourist places, sure. And there's a ton of medical tourists that go down just to get deals on dental work.
Some of my friends have done that.
Absolutely. And if you're not heavily insured for those kind of things, the difference between dental rates in the U.S. and dental work rates down there, and they're very qualified dentists, can be astronomical. You can pay a third. John, is that live?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I didn't know of any launch today.
I didn't either. I was thinking you'd know if anybody does. You probably track all the medium and large rockets going up.
This is just a news recap posted from this morning.
Oh, from the FAA? Do you know what they were launching? Is that private satellite
They're not launching anything. They're prepping for the Super Heavy Starship launch.
Oh, okay.
2 years ago, they did a whole bunch of, hops with the Starship alone. If you recall, most of them crashed. One of them kind of landed, bent one of the legs. And then they rethought all of the launch procedure and decided to build the stage 0 launch tower with the chopsticks to grab the rockets as they come in. And they've been, for the last 2 years, they've been prepping for a full stack launch with the full booster that has 33 Raptor engines.
Ooh.
Elon says it will either be a spectacular launch into orbit or a huge explosion. He said it really wants to melt. He said it's very difficult. It really, really wants to melt.
Yeah, some pretty substantial forces in play there.
He says either way, it will be a great show. Good morning, Mr. Lancy.
Good morning.
Morning.
I don't think I've changed anything with my mic, but I'm going to check anyway because my mic keeps on not being where it needs to be when I'm talking here, and maybe just a little bit low. Not too much, though. Hold on. I don't know what it is about. When I logged into Twit the other day, it was like slamming the limiters, and now it's not. Let's see here. And I don't know what I was doing different.
Yeah, you're a little lower than you would be as host normally, so you're about 27, 28, or 26.
So I'm going to try again a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit and think about it, and now I'm a little bit louder, or maybe a little, there we go. Turn it up a little bit.
Is your original sound where you want it to be?
It is. Oh, yeah, it is. It's so great. It's original. It's like the original sound. Not a fake sound or a copy sound. It's original. They should have it be original sound and fake sound. Or derivative sound. Just other sound. I don't know. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about SuperSources. I've collected a couple SuperSources for us to look at. And really, it's just the basis of talking about SuperSources and the design of them and how they work and some of the other bits and pieces. So stay tuned for that in the second hour. And if you've got questions about SuperSources, how to make them, how they work, how to make them work well, then throw those questions in to Makana and ask those questions early and ask often, vote early, vote often. You decide what we're talking about. So if you ask questions right now, you'll end up in the show. And also, if you vote on those questions, you can kind of order our run of show to your liking. So vote on the questions, ask questions, and now let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes this morning from Steve Uroff in Madison, Wisconsin, and Steve asks, I'd like to make a virtual window between two physically separate offices, an always-on or daily auto-started video conference that links two spaces in two different buildings. How would you tackle this?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I'm taking Zoom off the table. I'm taking Teams off the table because I'm assuming that's not where you want to go with this. And I'm also going to assume that both offices are connected with somehow IP related. And so the free version, the best free version is to actually have two NDI cameras, one at each location, and then a machine computer with NDI studio monitor set up on both sides. You can easily then create this window. The biggest concern would be how you would pipe the audio from one office to the other. But that would just be setting up a mixer. But it really depends on how you're thinking this whole thing out from there. Otherwise, Zoom back and forth would be the best thing. It's really all about security at that point. Do you want it to go outside your infrastructure or stay inside the infrastructure?
Yeah, if you're looking to do it in Zoom, we did reach out to our larger network for some expert advice, and here's the advice is to put a Zoom room in each building, make a recurring meeting for every day, and make both Zoom rooms alternative hosts for the meeting. Every day outside of the working hours, like 3 a.m., call this API on both Zoom rooms, and we'll put some links in here. Send the API call to both rooms. That way, the reset is automatic, and the rejoin are handled every day with no intervention. So that's probably a way to do it that would be fairly automatic, and it would just always be there every single time you came up. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Dave Chalmers in Glasgow, Scotland. And Dave says, probably a FAQ, a frequently asked question, but does the panel know any clever ways of getting the key fill graphics into an ATEM from an HTML source, for example, H2R graphics, other than using a Chroma or Luma key?
The problem really the question for you is whether you're using an ATEM HDMI or SDI. It is, if you're trying to do an animated lower third and you're using HDMI, there's no way to really lock those signals together. So you may end up with a sync problem where the HDMI, where the alpha channel may not be perfectly synced with the color channel, with the fill channel. And that means that you'll see some odd edges if it's moving too quickly. So that's one thing to think about there. Outside of that, though, I believe that you could use something on a Mac like Mimo Live and probably vMix on the PC, where you're basically sending out, you have two channels, you're grabbing onto the HTML with alpha channel and outputting it to the in two different channels out. Now, you could also use SPX graphics. SPX graphics will take that web and put it out there. So SPX is probably the most straightforward because that's all it does. The other ones that I've listed do a lot of other things you may want to add, but SPX is built for this. And if you're on a PC, you could install, what we use, all the graphics you see on this show are SPX with Casper. Casper is a free app that you can put on a PC, and we have an SDI card that is putting out a key fill signal. So if your ATEM is an SDI based ATEM, this should work really well. If it's HDMI, your mileage may vary, but SPX with Casper is probably a pretty straightforward way to get those graphics out. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina. And Bo asks, I'm almost ready to trade my Blackmagic Design 6K for a Sony with autofocus. Is it worth waiting until NAB to see if Blackmagic miraculously releases a firmware update enabling continual autofocus?
Go ahead, Chris.
I doubt it could possibly be firmware, Bo. And I think that obviously always wait before you purchase anything right before NAB. And we've had this discussion before in the past, and I think that there are probably meetings that happen at Blackmagic. By the way, did you see the April Fools? Apparently, Adobe bought Blackmagic. Did you see that? I bet you there are many conversations at Blackmagic. There are conversations at Blackmagic where I think they're possibly afraid to try and get into continuous autofocus because Sony is so far ahead. But yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath.
Yeah, I think the hard part with autofocus is that it's really hard. Like like what Sony does, you say, oh, well, Sony has autofocus, and other people have autofocus. Canon's got some autofocus, and Panasonic's got autofocus, and all of them are reasonably good. I think that really the design that Blackmagic took on is that it's a film camera, and film doesn't do that. And I think that was kind of a justification for the fact that it would take an enormous amount of R&D to do, for that part of the camera. And so, are we ready to do that when we release the camera? And I think the years ago when they did it, it may not have been. I think now there's a little bit more of a, for me, I had to switch over just because I just really realized as I turned that over, it was becoming more problematic. I would wait for NAB, not because I'm watching what Blackmagic does. I don't think they're going to do anything with their autofocus, but what Sony may do. So you may want to wait and just see all the Sony cameras. We already saw a full frame at the same or about the same price or less than the FX30 that I have. We saw another one come out last week. We may see more of those types of things. There's a lot of rumors that Sony's going to really double down on full frame sensors. And so you probably don't want to buy anything right now. I say that after I bought one last week, but I needed this camera for some other things, and I couldn't wait until NAB for it. So,
and yeah, what did you get, Alex?
I have an FX30 now. So,
that's what you're using right now?
That's what I'm using right now.
Oh, and I'm sad for you.
And the big thing is that when I can't show you that. So anyway, when I do this, I'm about to grab something that's NDA. So anyway, but when I grab this and you see the nice little case that I have here and I let go, it just drops right back into focus, and that's and then Chris's doesn't work nearly the same way. It's just out of focus the whole time. So anyway, so that's the big advantage. And I just found myself, I really wanted the short depth of field. I think I got really hungry for it with this background behind me. When I was gray, I could just turn up the f-stop and then it didn't really matter. But with this background, I wanted to be a certain softness, and to get to that softness meant that I was always a little out of focus for the show. And I was like, this has to stop. So anyway, that's how I got to the FX30. And part of it was that Sony lent me the FR7 for 3 weeks, and I got to feel what it was like to not be leaning in and out, all the time, and that was hard to get over. So anyway, that's what that's where I've gone with it. But I think that we should just see what happens at NAB. I wouldn't buy anything before then. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. And Paul says, can you set up an LG Quad 43-inch monitor with 4 HDMI inputs from a Mac M1, 2 HDMI screens stacked, and a PC, 2 HDMI screens stacked from that, and remotely access it with the same setup using Synergy and Remote PC?
I don't know how the Remote PC and Synergy would work together. That's the only part. The rest of it all makes sense. So it is a synergy between those monitors should work just fine. The Remote PC part should work just fine, but actually having Synergy and Remote PC working together, I think you're at a 50-50, and I haven't done it, but I think you're about 50-50 that it'll work. Next question.
Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona, up next with what's your favorite physical KVM, keyboard, mouse, and something else, where the focus is just the keyboard and the mouse?
I'm using a P-Way. P-Way, it's very, I don't know what it's something I got on Amazon. It does have HDMI in it. It is not and I think maybe it's not called a, let me see, I'm going to try to find it for you real quick. It's not, I think it's not called it's a KVM switch HDMI. It says P-Way on the top. So that's how I call it that, but it's a Graith Tech. And it's about $55. It's capable of 4K 30 for your HDMI cables, but I'm using just all I use for it is the USB connection to it. So that's I'm just hubbing between my key, and I have my keyboard. Now, one thing I will say is that for whatever reason, I haven't really spent enough time. I can't connect the mouse and the keyboard separately to this little KVM. So it may be a strike against it. Is that I can't, when I plug, there's two inputs in the front, but they never both work at the same time. My mouse, and it's a Kensington trackball, is super tweaky and crashes about once a day. And so what I mean by crashing is it just stops working. I have to unplug it and plug it back in again. But it will not work with the keyboard. It'll work if I plug it into the keyboard. It will not work if I plug it into the KVM. So those are some things to look at. But I've been using it for years now, and it otherwise works just fine. It's just got buttons on the front. It's really simple. I plug it in. It's a couple of rules is it had to have buttons on the front, not on the top. The reason for that is I stack other things on top of it. So I had a couple of rules that everything had to be going out of the back, and all the buttons had to be on the front, and it had to be a little rectangle. There's a lot of KVMs that have a lot of buttons in a lot of places, and I decided that was the requirement that I had for this. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael, and he notes Neumann has introduced the MT48 USB portable audio interface with built-in AES67 audio over Ethernet connectivity at about $1,850. Could this be a solid choice for a small system? And he's got the link there to it.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I got the notification in one of my mailboxes, so I took a look through the product. It is highly engineered, and at that price, as we will well expect it to. Neumann is an absolute top-of-the-line company out of Germany. It's been doing high-end audio for a long time. So I would expect that in terms of engineering and functionality and the rest of that, it's probably absolutely stellar. Now, that said, these things all depend on the digital audio conversion, the DACs that are inside of them. And I will say that even mid-priced DACs over the course of the last 10 years have really gotten up to a point where they're pretty indistinguishable between a lot of these units. Now, I'm not saying that the Neumann doesn't have some special sauce in it, but I've been trying to figure out why would I leap from something like my Universal Audio Apollo line, which is $300, $400, maybe $500 at the top range, and do 4 times that. There's some people for whom those budget considerations don't matter at all. And if you're touring behind Madonna or something, or that's a kind of dated, but if you're touring behind Taylor Swift, the difference between a $350 conversion thing to get a particular job done and an $1,800 one is insignificant totally. So I can see a lot of professionals going for this and going, what special sauce has Neumann put in there? AES67 capability is one of those things. So I'd look at this and say, do I need this level? And maybe where is it going? Where do you think they might be doing something special in the future?
Go, Jeffrey.
The best part about this device, of course, is that AES67, because they say that you can, when you connect up to your network, you can, and you don't have to use that. It's a really small touch screen that's there, but you can also call up an app on your iPad and then control it from there. So what I see this as really being the best part is if you have a studio where everybody's in an individual room and you're doing some recording, you have maybe music or podcasting or anything like that, you can have these little interfaces right in front of the musician or the podcaster, and then they plug into them, and then everything goes back to the main console. So this is a type of interface where you don't need to have a computer connected directly to this, which is great. And of course, I would guess that the best type of microphone that you'd want to have on there is a Neumann.
Yeah, I will say it looks really nice. I mean, without testing it, it looks like it's got a ton of features stacked into it. We know that, I think that what they're playing to is that we know that as a Neumann, the chances of it being, a pretty high quality build is very high. So, everything, your preamps are going to be great. Your just creature comforts, everything just kind of working together. It's going to have that kind of real precision feel to it. So I definitely think that there is a market for it. I think that it's probably not a big market, but I think that there's definitely a market for that piece. That I have to admit, I definitely would love to play with one, but I don't know I don't know when I would justify buying one. But it does look like a great interface. Next question.
Rob Bullock in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Really enjoyed the $1,000 studio episode last Friday and looking forward to more. In terms of lighting, can I get away with 2 Elgato Key Lights for my setup? And if so, what would be the best placement?
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, we spec'd out the NAND lights at that time, and what I'm using is 3 of them. And one is throwing a little bit of purple color splash on the back of my blinds there. One is a hair light. And then finally, I use a main light here above my teleprompter, which gives me flat lighting on me.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
If you have it attached to the table and you got 2 of them, you can actually do 2 at both corners and bring it up. Height is going to be an issue because those poles only go so high, and that the Elgato Key Light, once you get past a certain distance, it's not going to be as powerful as it's as needed. The other thing is, if you have a lot of wash through on the light and you want to try and corral it, there's no way to do a barn door or any type of diffuser filter on those things. So it's great for having it right at the desktop and then going from there. But if you need to have something a little bit bigger than that, you might want to look at something that can throw some more light.
Yeah, I think one of the big advantages of it is that the software for it is actually really good. So the software, we have a couple people using it. Nigel, who's usually on the show, is not here today, but he uses those, and it's just very convenient software. So 2 of those, you'll have a lot more control. Then, I have a lot of NAND lights, and the one downside of the NAND lights that are less expensive is there's not a lot of control for them. You can go there and dial them in to make them work. Now, if you don't change it very often, that doesn't really matter. But if you want to sit there and tweak them a little bit or move them around, having the software makes a pretty big difference. So I would definitely decide if that's something that you're interested in. They look like solid lights. They're smaller. So, for instance, the lights that I have are behind a diffusion, a little wall of diffusion. It's 5 foot by 3 foot. That's here. That I have diffusion on it, and then I have stuff behind it, and that makes it a lot softer. And you could do that with these as well. So you could build something out and then have those controls of color and so on and so forth. And it depends on how sensitive your camera is. For instance, the lights that I have right now are turned down. If I turn them down anymore, they turn off. So they're very, very low. It's really easy on my eyes, and I'm able to do what I want to do, but still have the directional lighting that I'm looking for. Next question.
Ike Potter in Hanover, Germany's up with this one. To save an outlet of my power strip, can I use a free port of my Power over Ethernet Plus switch with the help of a passive Power over Ethernet adapter RJ45 to DC to drive an ATEM Streaming Bridge? And if so, what DC plug's inner diameter is right for the streaming bridge? He's wondering if it's 2.1 or 2.5 millimeter.
Well, if you're, I see. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess the question I have for the streaming bridge is it a, I'm just trying to kind of piece this together.
To power the ATEM Streaming Bridge by adapting a Power over Ethernet signal?
But what I'm having trouble with is connecting the 2.1 and 2.5. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
I'm not sure about that. I think the best, because I think they're 2.1s that you get with the standard switch over, but I'm not 100% sure. The bigger thing is the streaming bridge goes from 6 volts to 30 volts on DC power. So 12 volt might be a good in between, depending on what you're connecting up to it. But you might run into some problems if you're overpowering it.
Yeah, it should come. I don't think that there's any POE RJ to TC to drive.
There is no POE on that. Yeah.
No, it's not POE. What he wants to do is use a passive adapter to. It's an adapter from RJ45 to DC So he wants to go from the POE to the DC, and I have to admit that for me, you're in uncharted territory. So taking, I didn't even know that existed. So we'll have to take a look at what maybe ask that again tomorrow and let me think about it a little bit. This came in a little later than we were reviewing them this morning, and I have to think about that a little bit. So what the question here is to take the power over Ethernet and reverse it. So you're taking the power from the Ethernet and pushing it out as converting it back to power, rather than, into a
he wants to vampire the Ethernet power to drive the ATEM Streaming Bridge.
Yeah, and then be able to, I assume, be able to use the Ethernet for the streaming bridge. I wouldn't do that. Like I can just tell you, I see that it's possible to do that. I'd be somewhat concerned about it. I don't know. That's a pretty untested thing to do. Maybe you can pull it off, but This is
the type of plug that he would want for that, but it's all about that can, and I don't know the size of that can.
Yeah, I don't know either. I would test carefully. It is a very unusual thing to do, and when you start doing things unusual, sometimes they're genius, and sometimes the difference between genius and crazy is close. So just be careful with it. There's a lot of things that could go wrong there. So I don't think it's not something that I would take on, but if you take it on, I would love to hear how it goes. Next question.
Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York says, has anyone legally done a live stream in Instagram lately? Months ago, they posted they were allowing RTMP streams, but I'm not aware of anyone that's been granted permission to do that.
We've been doing legal Instagram streams for a long time. They're all legal. Let's be clear. They're all legal. You're not breaking any laws if you use Yellow Duck. So Yellow Duck is the software that people use to go around it. And basically what it does is it goes out and finds the RTMP key from the Instagram and then gives it back to you. And so that you can just stream RTMP into Instagram. And that is not illegal. It's against their, they can turn it off at any point. It's against their TOS, but that doesn't make it illegal. And so people, I know it's possible. I actually can say that there's been one or two instances that I know of where someone at Instagram or Facebook just turned it off, just went and just turned off that stream. But outside of that, it has, it's a pretty solid way to do it. Now, the other way that that people are doing it is with, I think YOLO Live has a feature where it acts as a phone. So it's an input. All of us talked about this is the way around it. And what the idea is that you have something that says I'm an Android phone, but it has professional inputs into it so that you can just feed into it it just says this is the camera and I'm going through it. And so YOLO Live can do that right now, I believe. And then the most convoluted way to do this, which we have done, is that you I have a piece of it of my rig here. Hold on. Sorry, I was using this for something else. So this is the piece that makes all the difference. And so this is a macro system. And so basically what it does is it lets you let me pull this up like this. It lets you go back and forth in minute amounts and forward and back in minute amounts. This is what makes everything work about what I'm about to say. So you need one of these. They're not very expensive. I think I bought this for $30 or something on Amazon. Anyway, so you put you get a iPhone rig, and you put that iPhone rig on here, and you put your iPhone onto it, or Android, doesn't matter. And you shoot a screen, a screen in front of you, and you use this little thing here. First, you got to get it just right and just centered, and then you very carefully use those adjustments to move back and forth and forward and back to frame that frame. That's what I got that for, by the way. That's part of a kit that does this, and basically you frame up that monitor perfectly, and then you put your program into it and you shoot it, and you put a tent around it. So you put duvetine all the way around that rig, and it is completely legal to do it that way. And I got to tell you, when we first started doing this almost 10 years ago for Meerkat and Periscope, we just got a whole bunch of phone calls like, how are you adding graphics to it? How are you doing this? How are you doing that? And it was just because we had figured it out. It takes a lot of tweaking. You have to do a bunch of manual stuff to the camera to do it. It's not, I keep on thinking we should do a second hour about it, but I keep on feeling like they're going to get rid of all of this. There's no reason to talk about it, but that is the way that you can completely sidestep the stuff. And what we did is we used to keep a rig like that in our office, and you could literally take a satellite truck from one part of the world, send it to our office, and we could put it into Facebook, like as a cell phone, and so it's kind of a fun little project to build that out. So that's how you can do it right now, and you're not breaking any TOS. I don't think the YOLO Live breaks a TOS because it acts like a phone. Yellow Brick breaks the TOS, but it's not illegal. And I've never, not never, but almost never seen it get turned off. Those are the three big options, and then we're waiting for RTMP to show up. It's I have no problem telling you how to get around it because it's just so stupid. Instagram doing this is just so dumb. And I get why they're doing it. It's because they're trying to keep everybody from. They're trying to keep people like us from being able to produce higher quality streams, so that people, because what it does is it has a downward impact on people just doing them themselves. Like no one wants to do it with their own phone. If suddenly a whole bunch of really good streams go in and they can't figure out how they got short depth of field and how they have graphics and how they have everything else, the idea is to have as wide a user generated content net as possible, as opposed to having the best streams. And I just think that it's backwards thinking. Anyway, that's why they do it, and those are the ways around it right now. And someday maybe RTMP will come out. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Rob Bullock in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. If I plan on getting a Sony FX30 to use as my main camera for meetings, is there an easy way to turn this on and off with a switch of some sort? For example, using a Stream Deck? I'd like to avoid reaching behind my setup to turn it on and off in between meetings.
Not that I know of. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I don't know about that particular camera, the Sony FX30, but my Blackmagic 6K, the switch stays in the same on position all the time. I have wired its factory power supply into a switch on my desktop, and every morning before office hours, I hit the master switch, all the sub switches turns on, and the camera does light up and go into its regular mode. Now, the one thing is I lose some of my settings, so I have to reprovision it every day. But in the case of the Blackmagic, a power switch in front of it on and off maintains all of its basic functionality, and it just comes on and works.
I think that if you use there's a battery adapter, I believe, for the FX30 that slides into where it goes into, and you have to use that because you can't power it without the battery if you're using the USB-C, which, by the way, is amazing. The fact that it uses USB-C as a power is so cool because it took away all with the Blackmagic camera. I will admit, I love the Blackmagic cameras, and we still use a lot of them. But it was always terrifying to, if I lose the power supply, there's nowhere to get another power supply. Whereas with the Sony one, you're just thinking, well, I just need a USB-C somewhere. I mean, literally, I'm just using some random USB-C power supply that just works. The downside of that is that you need to have a battery in it. And so, it won't work. But there's a battery adapter that I don't have that you could put it in. In that case, then you would just put a switch onto the power like what Bill has and be able to turn it on and off. And when I turn it on and off, it doesn't lose any settings. It just comes right back on. The downside is, again, of the FX30 is that you don't have any control over it from your ATEM. So the problem that I have right now with the camera is in the afternoon, because I have the camera opened up. I don't have an ND for it. It doesn't have a built-in ND, so I don't have a way to turn it down. And when I get sunlight from this window over here across the back area, it just glows. And I haven't solved that problem yet. So fortunately, all of our meetings are in the morning. Anyway, but that's the next challenge there. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. What's your recommendation for a PC laptop for office hours-esque video calls and good but not premium video editing?
Good, Jeffrey.
Any type of gaming laptop is a great one to have. If you're going for Intel i7, i9, I think we're still dealing with that whole how many cores are inside the machine. for the best quality of video thing with Zoom. And of course, with these gaming laptops, they'll have external discrete graphics cards within them, and they always work. I've been using one, and I actually used it back in the early days when we were still going through Zoom, and we didn't have this higher end back end, and I recorded a few of the shows panels and of course active speaker from there, so that'll work fairly well.
And just a quick reminder that, of course, you can ask questions throughout the hour. So there is we're cutting through these questions at record speed, and maybe not record speed, but we're doing pretty good. Anyway, so if you have questions, you can go ahead and add these both for the first hour. These are general questions, as well as the second hour. We're going to talk about super sources. So go ahead and throw your questions into Makana and make sure to vote on the questions because you're deciding when we talk about them. Next question.
Next one comes to us from David Brady in New York City. Any word on the Zoom announced distributed record, the tech that does a local record that was announced at Zoomtopia?
Yeah, I don't think we've heard exactly when that's going to occur. That is still, there's no timeline to it. So my guess is it's definitely going to occur before next October because that's when the next Zoomtopia is. so I'm 100% certain that by the time we get to Zoomtopia, it will be available. And what this is this for another name for this is double ending. So it just means that you're basically recording on both ends or all 5 ends or 3 ends, and then you bring those back and you put those back into an edit. And to have it done rock solid at a large scale is challenging. So I think that's I think it's going to take time for them to work it into the system. Riverside.fm is another company that does stuff like this, as well as Stream Voodoo and a couple other companies. So there's a couple of them that already make this available. Go ahead, John.
That's scheduled to come out right after breakout rooms for webinar.
Yeah, exactly. Squadcast for audio is another company that does this. It was Squadcast. I've been on a couple podcasts. I haven't used it myself, but I've been on a couple podcasts that have used it that have been fairly effective. And it'll record those files locally, and then upload them, and that works well with Descript. So I think that's another thing to look at as well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with this. IK Multimedia has the iLoud precision range of studio monitors that have a built-in 96 kilohertz DSP and room correction. Would you trust a monitor that adds another analog to digital and digital to analog conversion after your audio interface? And he's got a link there to the product.
I don't know if I would want my speakers to be that smart. I think that's the problem that I have is that I what happens is every time you have an adjustment somewhere, you have another variable that you have to manage. So like, this is doing something and this is doing something. And sometimes you want certain parts of that pipeline to be dumb. You want them to just do what they're told to do and not get creative. Because then what happens is you put some correction, someone put a correction to there or someone does something there. And now you're having to recorrect for it in somewhere up the chain. And I think that I very much prefer my speakers to be not very smart. Go ahead, Bill.
So this is an interesting thing because, in my youth, all speakers were passive and you wired your stereo amplifier or receiver to them, and that's what made the sound. That transition to putting amplifiers in speakers happened, pretty late in my career, and it was interesting. I was nervous about them at first. Now, some of them turned out to be very good, and semiconductor and amplifier technology got so small and easy that putting it inside the speaker and giving you a powered monitor became kind of the standard order of the day, and they sounded great. Now we're getting to the point, and I think Apple kind of proceeded with the living room big, I can't remember what they're called, the AirPods or whatever. They're not AirPods, they're the big speakers, HomePods. Yeah. And so they would do some of what you're talking about. They would analyze the reflections coming back through the microphones that were in them and try to shape the sound based on what they saw as the reflections at various frequencies coming back. I'm not at all surprised that other people are trying to do the same kind of thing by making it an active thing, because even in the past, if you put your speakers in the corner, there would be one setting on the back of, for example, my studio monitors that they're corner placed or they're flat wall placed or something like that. And they were trying to bend the frequency curve a little to give you the best possible results out of those various placements. I kind of, though, land with Alex here about the fact that if you put too much smarts in them, you're giving the speaker more control than you have. And most people who do this at a seriously high level want that control over shaping the response curve for the circumstance that speaker is in.
And I think that really it's just having a single version of the truth, knowing that it's going to, if I'm turning this dial, there's nothing else that can go down the path. Now, I strongly prefer powered speakers over, I don't like speakers getting power from my amp. So I like them to be self-contained in that way. And a lot of that has to do with routing. So and I think I'm sensitive to it because I have a house full of speakers that are all powered by amps, which means that there's no way for me to really program them without programming them all from, and I have to always have an amplifier system, instead of just being able to send them an Ethernet connection and have them sorted out from there. And so I think that I'm particularly sensitive to that. But yeah, so not having, I do like that part. I just don't like the speaker actually having control over much. Even volume becomes problematic on our end. I have some smart speakers, not smart speakers, but I have some speakers with volumes on them, and we have to be very careful that they're all the same place all the time, and no one turned one up or down. Next question.
Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona. Alex, a couple of months back, you were experimenting with a 1920 by 720 display dedicated to displaying scopes. Did that work out? And he's got a link there to something, it looks like.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, that's the model number. This is the little display that you had.
Yep.
It was very wide, very short, looked very interesting. Wanted to know what happened.
There it is. It's still not working.
Yep.
It works. It works. It's just not in work. And it's mostly been. It hasn't been to do with anything wrong with the display or anything else. It is. What happened was I had a Mac Mini dedicated to it, and then I lent it to my wife, and then I had another Mac Mini connected to it, and then I used it for the Michael Krasny show, and then I had another. It hasn't been a function of the problem with the monitor. It has been a function of the computer that will drive it. Has been the thing that has been delayed, and so I keep on, it's sitting here waiting for me to do that, and I just keep moving on and it's just getting the right computer. It's been my computers. I got one of the Melees. It should be arriving today or tomorrow, so that I can test some other things that are related to that. So we'll see how that goes. Next question. Sorry.
Alexander Knight in Vancouver, British Columbia says, I want to build an HDMI convenience panel. Are the Neutrik HDMI feed-through jacks any good? And he's got a link there to them.
I'll generally say that I trust Neutrik more than others when it comes to building these connectors. These are the ones, I would probably choose these. Neutrik generally does a great job at building these. And what Alex has put up is it's essentially, let me see if I can pop this up here. What you have here is so this is what these look like here, and what's important here is that what these go into a larger rack, so they just screw in these parts of the screw in here there, and so you put your HDMI in here, and then all it's doing is doing a pass through. So when your HDMI comes, when you're plugging a cable in, it's going to just simply pass that signal through. You do need it to be a relatively solid signal, but it's relatively straightforward. It's just metal going back and forth. So it's not doing anything smart. These mounts allow you to just kind of put a long string of them along. And what's nice about this is it's kind of a modular setup. So there's SDI versions and XLR versions of all of these mounts. And so you basically get a convenience panel that is just got holes in it all the way across, and you simply add what you want into those convenience panels. And so some of them might be XLR, some of them might be they can be a lot of different things. XLR, SDI, USB, HDMI, Ethernet, all of those things can be in one convenience panel. And so and Neutrik, I think, makes all of those options. So I would definitely recommend that. Next question.
Next one comes from Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York, and he says, to the panel, anyone able to share what projects you're working on this week?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, recently we've been doing a lot of like award show videos that are going to play into big conferences, and conveniently, they're usually like a host and 3 people. I've been using a lot of Zoom ISO. I record. I use my little pretend Zoom ISO rig using the HDMI breakout things into the Zoom ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. So I have the 4 heads. I pre-build the 4 up with their pretty artwork that they supplied me, and I record the 4 up and the 4 ISOs, and I multicam those together. And I've also been utilizing a feature in Zoom. I hope everybody knows about it, where if you do a cloud record and you turn on the right settings in the back end, you can get an isolated audio track of each person. Obviously, this doesn't work if you're doing a live show, but I'm an editor, so I'm just recording stuff for edits, and I've been doing a lot of those lately.
Good, Bill.
My A project this week, I'm working on a piece. It's a video piece and a kind of an explainer for the Natural History Museum that's in Balboa Park here in San Diego. It's called the NAT, and they've been in business for a gazillion years. People don't understand as much that they're not just a display museum. They have teams of archaeologists and scientists that go out and scour this part of the world, the area entirely around San Diego. And they do actual research out there, and they have in their basement just tons of samples of particular things, whether it's the carcasses of different species that have evolved over the course of years or whatever it is. So it's been really fun. I have to say there have been a couple of challenges about it. More and more scientists out in the field are just shooting things on iPhones. So there's a lot of coverage. Some of it is from bigger cameras, but a lot of it nowadays is just following that the best camera you got is the one with you. So some of our best shots, particularly close-up shots of things they have unearthed out in the field research, are coming out of iPhones. So it's a combination of bigger cameras, historic footage, and contemporary stuff like that. The other thing that's fun is that my wife has been dabbling more and more in voiceover, and they asked her to do the scratch track, and I've just been enjoying that. She did a fabulous job, and that's part of the project this time. So we're having fun with that.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, office hours is my expensive habit, so I've been dipping my toe into the world of Dante. Audinate has some really great training classes out there. I have already passed certification for levels 1 and 2, so this week I'm going for number 3.
Go, Jeffrey.
So I am 2 things. First of all, getting prepared for NAM and NAB. So that's just trying to figure out where all my gear is, and then get that in order. So when it's time to go, I can have it all packed up, ready to go. And then the other thing was I've been working on this. I get a lot of these lower end video things, like for instance, and stuff that I don't normally use. Like for instance, we have the Yellow Box Pro here. So I've been I wanted to actually have a setup that was super easy to set up and tear down, and it was self-powered. So I have these. Geniverse has these home power boxes that are meant for emergency use when your power goes out in the house, but they can actually hold onto a stream. So what I did was I'm playing with 2 PTZ cameras and a single point my Sony 4K camera going into the Yellow Box Pro, and then of course the PTZ cameras being controlled by a joystick, and with that going out, setting up at a live event, not using the sound, not using anything from the venue, the table I bring in, the chair I bring in, everything I bring in myself, set it up, and then run including the popcorn, and run everything. And then when it's time, I can tear it down. And in the first test here, I got it set up within 20 minutes, and I got it tore down within 15 minutes. And really easy to do. And no streaming or anything, like straight up recording. But I'm going to start thinking about how I can stream that out, and if I want to use the Yola box as the driving switcher, or go to a machine with the NDI, or go to a machine with HDMI and something that'll capture those HDMI inputs.
Yeah, and for me, I'm bidding on a bunch of concerts for the fall. So I'm working on bids. That's mostly what I'm working on. I got 6 concerts, I think, in the fall potentially. And so I'm working on those bids. And we're doing some R&D related to, streaming to the venues and so on and so forth. So we're working on that. And then for me, I'm also getting ready to move the Michael Krasny show really to the SDI. I've been threatening to do this for a little while, and we got part of the way there last week. But we're going to be moving to the HDMI Mini Extreme with, it'll be it doesn't matter whether people are in the room or not in the room. So they're on Zoom. We're getting it from Zoom ISO. If we get it from the room, we're getting it from, we're getting bigger cameras. And one of the things about what we're doing there is that the pit is right below our office at 3210. And we ran fiber down there and Dante and connectivity. And so what we're working on is getting to a point where we only have to take lights, cameras, and mics down there, and everything else gets run back up to us, so that we don't have to do much of a setup down there. So we're working on that process this week. Next question.
Next question comes from Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado. Anyone on the panel have new uses or a new workflow for using the Stream Deck Plus?
I don't know if I have any new ones. Usually what happens when I figure out what to do, I have to admit, I'm a little bit lazy. And so when I'm looking at new apps of what I want to do, I go to there's a website called sideshowfx.net. And SideShowFX builds the templates for you. So there's a bunch of templates. I use the one I've been using the Stream Deck Plus for is using it with Resolve, because there's a Resolve template, and I'm able to tap on a bunch of things and make adjustments really quickly. And I found that it definitely speeds things up. And I didn't really think about, I've always thought about Stream Deck as kind of a live tool, but really looking at it as a convenience tool for, for using other apps. There's now a template for Final Cut Pro. So I'm looking at that they have a template, not for the Stream Deck, but for your iPad for Cinema 4D, which I was super excited about. So anyway, I'm looking at a couple of those templates right now. Next, and just another quick reminder that, and we'll get to John here in a second, that you can still ask questions. We've got a little bit of room for this question. So if you have quick questions, and most importantly, as we get near the end of the hour, vote on those questions, because as we run out of time, we'll pick the ones that have the most votes. Go ahead, John.
Jonas just told us about some app, though I can't remember specifically what he was using it for. And Fenwick also has one as well. I don't know what he's using it for. Stream Deck Plus, Chris.
Stream Deck Plus. What are you using? What are you using the Stream Deck Plus for, Chris?
It's actually not even plugged in right now.
Oh, there you go.
I found the fact that, it has prospect. It's cute to have these knobs, but until I can really assign the knob to something that I need, there's some sort of standardized things, and I think, I'm not saying there aren't people that are using it successfully, but it's not controlling the things that I want to use. Also, there's really interesting tie-ins to the WaveLink software, which is a digital mixer-esque device, which gives you the ability to have 2 mixes, one for your ears and one that you stream, which is basically what we've been doing with SoundDesk. The problem is it doesn't work most of the time. It seems like it's going to work. It acts like it's about to work, but I can't get it to actually work. Maybe it's me. Usually it is. But I couldn't get it to do what I wanted it to do.
Right. Good, Tom.
Well, kind of off topic for office hours, I was watching a Stream Deck implementation on YouTube on a site called Smart Home Solver. And they had tips on how to use your Stream Deck for things that don't even relate to audio and video, but yes, controlling things around your home.
Yeah, you definitely can tie a lot of those things in. I have to admit that I get obsessed. What I'm using not so much my Stream Deck Plus for, but I have a Stream Deck. It's to control my little this my little telestrator, so I can very quickly move through things and colors, and I can make the the colors thicker, and I can make them thinner, and it's all tied into the Stream Deck. And for me, that has been the big update. The big thing is now I have to think about, what do I design the buttons as? And I'm like, oh, there's a lot of time there. I just look at it like that's a big area of time for me to fill. Go ahead, Bill.
I don't know if this is plus or minus for Chris's thought, but I've integrated a Thunderbolt 4 dock into my voice booth because I had some extra things, and the MacBook Air doesn't have a lot of ports. And I couldn't get it to work. It was driving me nuts. And so I called tech support, and they responded by email with here's what you do. Take everything out of it, leave it alone for, 45 seconds to make sure all of its internal memories are clear. Plug things in this order, and particularly your computer only into the front USB-C jack, not any of the ones in the back, and then power it up and let us know what happens. And sure enough, when I did everything in exactly the order they specified, it came to life and worked. And it just reminds me of those old SCSI days and things like that, where if you didn't get things correct so that its internal smarts could figure out what it was looking at first, second, and third, it was a brick until I did it correctly. Once I did it correctly, it came to life and everything worked. So I'm going back to my old thinking about, once you make something work, figure out how you did it and follow that path every time so it doesn't stop working.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, how much difference does a calibration plugin like Sonarworks SoundID Reference make when working in an untuned room or with headphones? And he's got the link there.
I think that you're always going to want to try to find a way to do some of these pieces here, and I think this is still referring to a simulator. Is that what we're talking? Yeah, it's you definitely want to you definitely want something like this to calibrate it to make sure that you're there. I think you just want to make sure that you're not thinking about the headphones as speakers and the speakers as headphones. They're different spaces. So I don't know anybody that's actually used this. When I look at it, I go, oh, that's really good. Someone may have used it on the forum. If you've used it, go ahead and throw it in the comments. But I've not seen it in action. Next question.
Gordon Light in Los Angeles, California says, when creating a lighting kit for interviews, are 200-watt LED lights enough, or should brighter lights be included?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So how much light a device puts out is one of the metrics that I pay a good little bit of attention to for this reason. If you have too much, it's pretty easy to lower it using scrims or gels or turning down the power supply if it allows that. If you don't have enough, the only solution you have is to add more devices to get enough. Now, that said, there are some use cases where too much light is a very bad thing. And I run across a couple of them in my life where I had a source that was so bright that even with gelling the heck out of them, I just didn't feel, I feared I was burning up a lot more energy and heat than I needed, and then putting a whole bunch of stuff in it to get the amount of light cut down so that it was where I wanted it to be. So 200-watt LED, I would look for some metrics in terms of how much light does it put out, what is the fall off over distance, and that's going to change depending on whether it's a point source or a panel or something like that. There's just a lot of fiddly things to learn about lighting, but brighter lights can be useful in that circumstance where you can always cut them back. You can't really increase them past their maximum power rating.
Next question.
Rob Bullock in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin says, two key lights, FX30 and SM7B. Yeah, okay. SM7. That's right. SM7B directly into a Rodecaster Pro II. Any issues with this setup? I only require one camera, so not sure if I'd get much use out of an ATEM Mini. What else would be a must-have or nice to have? The use case is 4 hours a day for meetings.
We are a fickle crowd. That's exactly we didn't know anything about the FX30, and now we're all like, okay, we're done. We've moved on. Anyway, so I think that that's pretty good. I think that I don't know, depending on how many mics you're using, I don't know how much you need the Rodecaster Pro. So that would be the only thing I would look at there from a price perspective. That's a lot of, unless you're really using all of those bits and pieces, I don't know if it buys you much. So I might expend my money in other places there. I think it's like $600. And so if you go a little higher, you get a Mix Pre 3. And if you go a little lower, you get Zoom and a variety of other interfaces there. So, and I'm just not sure. You just got to make sure that you're actually going to use the features. And I'm not saying that the Rodecaster isn't worth it. I'm just saying that you'd have to make sure that you're going to actually use those features to make it worth it. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and if you use the SM7B and you don't get the Rodecaster Pro II, you will need to find an interface to get it into the computer. So an MV7 might be the better solution, so you can get a USB rather than an XLR output.
Next question.
Bob Sturdivant in San Antonio, Texas is up next. Any recommendations for portable mass storage? And he's looking for 12 terabytes or greater that works well with Mac OS that doesn't break the bank, please.
Go ahead, Tom.
12 terabytes that doesn't break the bank and is portable. Well, I use the Western Digital Elements here, and it's pretty portable, and it does have a little power adapter, but for $250, 12 terabytes, that's not bad.
Yeah, it depends on what size of the bank you're trying to break. So I think that you just have to decide, what is it worth and how portable and how fast. And there's a lot of other bits and pieces in there that you want to look at. I can't think of the name of it right now off the top of my head. I have two of them over my shoulder, but I can't see them from here. The OWC, what a couple of us have are these OWC NVMe systems. And so these are 4 NVMEs. You can get to 16 terabytes relatively easily, I think even up to 32 if you use them. And they do get a little pricey, a couple $1,000s, but they are super fast. There's no moving parts. And they are, and they're super solid, and you can just throw them in your backpack. And I have done that many a time. We take them.
They travel well.
Yeah, they travel well, and mainly we take them to places for backup. So if we want to pull a bunch of stuff off of something to back it up, this is what we use. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say I always try to buy all my drives in pairs. I don't like having only one drive, particularly something like 12 terabytes, where whatever you're putting on it, you've got a lot of it, which means that you're at the one point of failure. I've had enough times in the course of my career where I plugged a drive in and suddenly it isn't there anymore to ever want just a single point of failure to take away unbacked up information. So I tend to buy pairs, and sometimes if it's really important stuff, I will use an old drive that I know works. I will pair that with the new drive I'm in for a while. And then maybe in 6 months or so, I'll buy another one of the drives, hoping that I will get in a second batch, because we've seen circumstances where a drive manufacturer would just for a while have kind of bad drives for a particular sales piece. So even buying 2 drives in the same batch can sometimes reveal a problem. I'm just pretty persnickety about data that way.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the quality of the NVMEs as well. So the one that I talked about in the past, or the one that I just talked about, it's the OWC. It is OWC Express M4M2 is what we have been using. If you buy OWCs, they're 4 terabyte memory. I think it's in the $400 and some range. So you're talking about $2,000. The enclosure is $350. Then you buy the memory separately. But you can get stuff like Crucial for as little as $220. And so between $1,100 and $1,100 and $2,000, you can end up with a RAID that is pretty fast, and 16 terabytes. And we've been, I've used them for projects. I find that a lot of my projects have been, we have 8 terabytes because a lot of my projects tend to be like an 8 terabyte project. And I don't know why they all fit into that. But we find it's really easy to throw them on. The biggest problem is figuring out where you're going to put it when you're done. So we use spinning RAIDs, or not spinning RAIDs, but spinning drives, and we back them up to those. Next question.
Tim O'Brien in Chicago says, big fan of Bill's hard shadows and wallscapes. How are you lighting your background? Pin spots, louvers, honeycombs? None of the second stuff. So I bought a bunch of little small pin spots, and I originally had the lightscape done with those. 3 of those really inexpensive ones have burned out over the course of time, and I haven't replaced them. So what you're seeing now behind me is a couple of slightly more expensive pin spots, one of which is creating that highlight on the old Mac that I love, my first Macintosh from back in the late days. The wall light there is that same little light positioned close to the curtains and acting as a accent slash there. And I think it works in part because of the green banker's light that I put on a dimmer and put there just to do that. So there's really only 3 lights lighting my background other than the spill from my key lights. And I have a Lowell Tota LED inside of a large softbox here, which is providing my main key light. And then to get some light in my eyes, there's a small 4x8-inch panel from Newer that is just acting as a highlight. And that's my whole lighting thing. So I've really only got, I think, 5 lights going on both key lights and background here.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Alex Lindsay in Novato, California. Has anybody played with Midjourney's new Describe?
Go, John.
Alex, can I do a quick screen share?
Yeah.
So if you search for Chris Fenwick on the Googles, you'll find this picture of Chris. And if you do Describe in Midjourney, it gives you 4 different possible iterations of what it thinks it is. A man wearing a black shirt pointing a camera in front of multiple digital screens. And it does find After Effects there, Chris. Is that After Effects on that one on your Mac back there? So it's not perfect.
Yes, it is.
It says all kinds of interesting stuff. Heavy use of palette knives. Avocado punk. I don't know what that is. Colorist, particular inking, colorist. But this is pretty interesting. Sky and I just started playing with this yesterday. And this is also embedded in OpenAI, but currently it's turned off right now.
You go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, what I really like about this is if you're trying to create metadata for a photo, this might be a fun way to do it. I started with using some of the Midjourneys I created to see how it would think the keywords would go to actually create the item. Like, for instance, I did this one where Darth Vader was riding a unicorn on the galaxy edge or whatever. And so I brought that photo in. It gave me 4 different options. I love the fact that it'll actually make some links. Like, for instance, there's one image that had like Scott Adams and a link to Scott Adams to find out who that is. Then what I did was I tried a couple other things, the actual photos. One was a dish that I had a few weeks ago. I think it was at CES or something like that. And I brought it in and it was actually telling me all the foods that it saw inside the dish so I could possibly recreate that dish at home. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, it was pretty interesting stuff.
I think that what's crazy about it is that, a lot of us try to look at an image. How do I recreate an image that looks just like something else inside of Midjourney? And it's just been this huge lift of us trying to figure out, like, how do I describe it? And so what's interesting is it's giving you a back end to seeing how Midjourney see things, how it draws things, because it's reverse engineering that image and telling you this is what I see. And it gives you 4 options. And what's cool is at the bottom, just like you would have the grid that you would pick, you just hit make an image out of those. And so it's letting you do it, and then it lets you just immediately throw it back into the system to see, what you get. And of course, one of the things that you can do there is, of course, then just tweak little things like, oh, I like that, but I want it to be somewhere else. I like this, but I don't want something else. And right now it also creates images that never existed in the world. It's kind of crazy. Like, I put a Lakers image in just because it was the random thing that I grabbed. And what you end up with is a whole bunch of Lakers, shots that never existed in the world. So it's an interesting thing. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says Blackmagic Design just introduced the Videohub 12G range that can route SD, HD, and Ultra HD in the same box. Would a Constellation 4K be not too far behind? And he's got a link there to the Videohub.
Yeah, it does feel like the drip of Blackmagic is just going to be every week we get a couple new things, and I think that this was worth hanging out for the extra hour there. So I think that this is really interesting. So it's a less expensive 12G capable router, so that's interesting in itself. And then in addition to that, it's now doing. In the past, routers generally don't do this, or at least the Blackmagic ones. They take the format that you gave it to them and they put it right back out again. So this one is actually able to scale, or move things around in different ways. And so it's a really interesting. I think it is. I think it's doing up down cross conversions, which is an odd thing to have available in a router. If it's just saying it can do all those formats, then it's let's see here. Yeah, I think that it can. Yeah. If it's just saying multiple formats, I just saw it because this question just came up, and I'm not entirely sure because they've always been able to do multiple formats to go in. The question is it doing it? And you wouldn't expect it coming out of an up-down cross. Yeah, I don't think that's anything new, actually. The multi-format stuff is all stuff that you've been able to do. Anything that comes in just goes out the same that it came in at, so it's not a big deal. They do look, they're the new kind of format. The prices dropped a bit. And so, with Blackmagic, we constantly get that. I think that, it's great. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens next. I think next week will be exciting. A lot of companies, by the way, next week will be busy for us because I think a lot of companies are going to try to get ahead of NAB. That's what it feels like, and they're going to try to, get their stuff out before NAB starts. So next week should be full of announcements. All right, we are jumping into our second hour. We're going to be talking about SuperSources. We're going to keep on coming back to these maybe once a year, just taking a look at things and having a discussion. It's a new set of people. It's a new set of people looking at them. It's a new audience. And it's definitely something a lot of us do. So if you've got questions about SuperSources, how to construct them, how to design them, definitely throw those in. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a couple of them. Some of them we've seen before. Some of them we haven't. And I will say, what I thought was interesting collecting these was things have changed over the last year, and not so much in the design, but in the use of them. One of the things that I found was a lot less broadcasters are using SuperSources, and I'm not sure exactly why, but it was a lot harder to find them than there was in the past. The other thing is that the overseas, I'll show you, I only have one overseas because almost all the overseas ones were that I was able to grab at least off of YouTube TV and off of YouTube were very basic, and just very not really work, we're just going to put things in. And I thought that was interesting as well. And so it's a fascinating move as you keep on watching these things. So we'll, again, if you've got questions as we start to talk about these, we're going to show you a couple different versions of these, and hopefully they drive a conversation. Otherwise it'll be a short hour. So let's go ahead and let's see if I can get this working here. And so I did a little compilation of these. And so this is the BBC. This is about as basic as you can get. And then I checked a couple shows. I was like, is this it? Is this all you got? And the answer is yes, it's all I got. So the BBC, it really is these are two different shows. Now, what I did think is interesting is they are making decisions about where they're, where they're grabbing onto these things. So if you look at this here, this where that ends, and then we go to the next one, you see that they've kind of, this is an equal section here, that's connecting those out. And I think that what I would say is that I actually, of course, we're very gray based in office hours. And so the gray doesn't bother me, that much. I do think it's interesting to have any sans serif in a lower third. We're not talking about lower thirds today, but I was like, really? Anyway, so there is movement up here. So if you watch it very subtly, it may be getting compressed out, so you may not see a lot of it, but there is a little bit of movement across. There it is. Let's see a little line. Let's go back. Let's see. See, there's a little line up here. So it's not that it's completely, at first I thought it was just completely just like this light gray. But anyway, so this is, but here you have that SuperSource. Here you have some looping background, but it's very, very subtle. And this is about as subtle as we're going to see, as far as examples go. Now here you have another one here. Now, one thing that's interesting that I thought was interesting here is that this lower third is it's actually overlapping, and this is kind of, I always consider that a no-no, is to have my SuperSource go underneath my lower third. Visually, you'll see, we'll look at a couple other examples. Visually, it drives me a little crazy when people do that. So, but there's a lot of, these are pretty well designed. So what you want to look at here is you've got this header that's up here that goes across, and it's got a little bit of a drop shadow. So this creates kind of a shelf at the top here of what that looks like there. And then you've got these colors that are all, and slowly moving to give it motion here. Now, one of the things that you want to look at here, and we'll go back here, is one thing about SuperSource is that, a lot of people ask, why do you need multiple MEs? Like, oh, one ME is fine. Like, why would you need 2 MEs or 3 MEs or 4 MEs? And the reason, this is a good example of what we're doing here. So you may want to be able to control what this background looks like, but they're cutting here. So this is cutting. So this is an ME, right? There is an ME or it can be a play out. It could be a play out put there, but you can, the ability to cut, into that'd be another ME as the source for that window, as opposed to, having to try to figure out what that input is all the time. So that's one thing you want to look at. Another thing I always pay attention to is whether they're putting any borders on that, which they're not in this case. And so anyway, so then you have this is from NBC. Now this is about as busy as you can get, as far as this goes. And so here you have like a skyline. Someone did a design for it, and you've got some reflections. So they're doing kind of this reflected background here. Now here they are separating themselves by these edges here that you have that are there. So that's kind of placing them into that area. Now what's interesting is there's a couple of shots. I don't think I see it here, but when I was recording this, they're in the same table. They're all looking straight ahead. It's weird. It's weird to have people in the same room looking up at the window at the thing, because there's a point where he looks at her and you get that, oh, they're in the same room together. It's like, I'm sorry, but that's just weird. Anyway, so to put it in the SuperSource.
Is the middle guy coming remotely?
I think the middle guy is. There it is. There it is. See? He is looking at her and she's looking at him. And I think he is remote. And I get why they're doing it, but it just weirds me out. I don't know why it is. There's something about if someone looks at them when I'm in a SuperSource and someone looks at each other, like that's for me a big no is to not look at each other. You just keep looking forward. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to bounce this off you and ask your thoughts about this. Outside of the Blackmagic world, I've never heard the word SuperSource until you told us about SuperSource 3 years ago.
I don't know.
I just heard it 2 up, 4 up, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't know if I've heard SuperSource used in other cases, but usually it's a lot of times it's 2 ups and 4 ups and those types of things. I don't know. I mean, Blackmagic didn't create the word SuperSource. There's definitely other people that have used it, but it is something that is much more Blackmagic based than others. But I think that it defines it well, as far as what we're looking at here. This is another example where in some cases these are video inputs, but in some cases you would have this be, each one of these could be an ME that you could be changing things for and putting things into, to make that work. But again, this part here is the thing that I would try to avoid, as you go through that there. Let's see if I can, now I must have clicked on something here. Hold on.
That is really busy, but CNBC is so much
oh my gosh,
leave on all day for people who are interested
and all this
in
stuff. The other thing is all this down here just destroys your monitors, because it stays up all the time. Now here's an interesting way that they got from one place to the other. So the person's talking, and there's different ways, and we'll look at this a little bit. A lot of times you just cut to the SuperSource, but here they used a sweeper, so you can see that sweeper was used to get to the SuperSource here. Now this is a SuperSource with a graphic, so this is not. It's borderline SuperSource, because they're not really. It's a graphic that's being played up there, but I do think that they, it's kind of nice to have this little extra header that they put in here, and we'll talk about graphics on another day. But it's I do kind of like the transition here. I mean, the one thing about CNBC is they put money into their graphics, and so that's another way to kind of frame folks up. Now here's another one from MSNBC, and here you have, this is a pretty boring, but somewhat effective movement. So you've got these things that are just simply constantly scaling out. So that's it. That's what they're doing. They are bordering it here with this white, this white area here. So they kind of give it a frame. This is something that what I was talking about earlier, that they've been careful not to have something go over top of what they're already doing. And so this is more of a built, and you'll see, I'm not sure if you'll see it in this capture, but down here you'll often see that's where the lower third, that is a window for the lower third to actually work there.
Hey, Alex, that's showing Pacific time, and you recorded this. That makes sense. Do you think they're doing 4 separate feeds for the 4 time zones so that they're putting a specific overlay for each time zone into that time zone?
No, I don't think so. I think that they just leave it the way I think that they are.
So it's all West Coast time?
I think this is all East Coast time, actually. I believe. I don't know where they're putting that, but I don't think that they're not punching that in. It's, it's with the time zone that they have.
That's what I was interested in. I wondered if that overlay was maybe becoming more localized and they had 4 different feeds for the 4 different time zones. That'd be interesting.
I don't think so. This, by the way, is why people want clean feeds. If you're asking, why does a network want a clean feed? A clean feed is the graphic here, without the lower thirds. And, a lot of times the network feed is clean. And the reason that they want it to be clean is so that when they put their graphics on it, it's not going over top of somebody else's graphics. So that's, if you're wondering, why do they ask for the clean feeds? That's why they ask for the clean feeds. so that their stuff doesn't go over top of it. Here you can see another one that's kind of broken up into that area there. Okay. Let's see. I will say, doing these captures, one thing you're struck with, just watch some of these and put your headphones in and listen to how horrible the audio is. Like these studios are hard surfaces. They're wearing lavs, and it's just intolerable. Like with headphones, I guess you can listen to it when you're like somewhere in the house doing something else, or you don't have a good stereo system, or you're just watching through your TV. I'm sure it's fine. But when you listen to it through headphones watching this, it's just so echoey, and you're hearing all this extra sound from them moving the papers, and it's really a bummer. And then on top of that, I forgot, every time I do the SuperSources, I'm restruck with how much dribble comes out of our national news. Anyway, so this one, I have to admit, out front is always one that I kind of use an example. I really like their design. So I like and I know that this is a little over the top, the little lens flares, but it does give it this kind of glassy feel to it. And this is where they're putting these lower thirds in. Now they could be supering these over top of the graphic, but a lot of times I think, and they are here because you can see that it's coming out of that graphic. It's actually, so this is a key over top of the SuperSource. It's not a key inside of the SuperSource, and you can tell because this highlight is crossing over that edge that's there. So, but I like it. I do like ours. I like blue in the background because I feel like skin tones look better when they're not competing with red colors and other. So blue, green, those types of cool colors are great colors to have as backgrounds because it complements the skin tone. When you use warm colors like yellow and orange and red, you end up with I feel like people don't look as good, as they go through it. Now you can see what they did there. Now this is kind of an interesting puzzle of what's going on here. So this key is sitting over top of this, and so it fades out for a second. This transition, though, I believe is inside of that ME. So that is a transition that's being fired into that ME, which is then feeding into this.
Look at the upper right-hand corner, though. It's hanging out of the border a little bit. The upper right-hand corner, it's just like at pixel, maybe, right there.
I don't see it. I see that it's close to the same color there, but I don't see it going. I don't see it leaking.
Okay.
I think it's all in there. Yeah, I think there's part where the color matches it. But that's again what you have to think about when you're thinking about these super sources is stacking them. How are you going to stack the super sources, into what you're doing there, and how are you going to put the MEs into making that actually, work. So this is, and then. More CNN. Again, this kind of soft background that isn't getting in your way, but still moving. You can see that there's still some movement back there. And that can be really, I've done those with replicators in motion. You throw a bunch of replicators in and let them do their thing, and they're kind of moving around slowly, interacting with each other. And here you can see, now what you can see here, in addition to the fact that CNN should go to jail for what they do to these fonts. Stretch the font. They stretch the font. So anyway, I'm sorry. They're
being indicted in New York City today.
Yeah, exactly. They're being indicted. Yeah, but
the font police are after them.
Yeah, exactly. The font police are chasing them down. There's going to be a 12-hour tour or chase scene that we're going to go in there all over this stretched font. Oh, see, look at that. So that's what it's kind of supposed to look like. It's probably stretched even then, but look, this is that. That is a travesty. Like, I'm just going to keep on going back to it. Like, don't ever do that in your own shows.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't realize they had stretched it to fill a space.
Oh my gosh.
Alex has been talking about this for years. Just remember, Alex,
from CNN.
Alex, just remember the world was perfectly happy with VHS for 3 decades.
That's all I'm saying. Just, why are you doing that to us?
Well, at least somebody didn't set it that way. They set it right, and then they stretched it out. So it's the.
I don't even know if it's right. I don't know what's. I don't even know. I don't even know what's right anymore when they do that to the thing. Anyway, so anyway, but what you can see here is that they have thought, unlike the one that we saw before. There's a lot of thought to where this goes and how it fits underneath and with the with the graphic that they have here. So everything kind of they designed the whole story of what they were doing there as far as the graphic goes.
I can imagine actually, Alex, how that meeting went when they came up with the stretch the font thing. So here's what happened: the lower line disappeared, and then a producer said, "But we have empty space on the screen." Well, new stuff will come. Yeah, but what are we going to do while there's empty space now? Well, what do you want to do? Well, why don't we just stretch it out? What? Just stretch it out. What? Yeah, just make it bigger. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
It makes the words bigger, easier to read. Sure.
and then whoever was building it, I think, like prepped their LinkedIn page and started applying for
and quit the next day. Yes.
Yeah, like I'm out of here. I am so out of here. Anyway, this one. So this is again where you want. This is a BBC reporting about a summit, the Summit for Democracy or whatever. And so here you can see a more typical one that you see in corporate a lot. So this is but now what we've seen also with SuperSources is using them for using SuperSources as a way to bring in interpretation. So sign interpret ASL into it, and this is a pretty good design of it. A lot of times people put this up here, which is really annoying. I think this works really nicely as far as putting it down here. I think that this background is a little dark. We're not really getting into backgrounds, but I felt like it was a little dark. I think that our person fades into it a little bit. But I do think that one of the things you can see is a lot of thought process related to this, and we're not getting to this directly, but since we're here, you have the blues that are all going through here. She's wearing blue. The background is dark blue. Like they thought it through. Like a lot of times it's kind of cobbled together. And I think that was a pretty well thought out process. Obviously, they're waiting for some graphic up here because they've left I hope that they're waiting for some graphic because they left a huge gap up there.
Only bobble is that hashtag getting killed by the lower.
Well, that's because this is getting killed. It is something you have to think about when you're thinking about this. The advantage of putting something here is that it's not going to get cut off by other people's graphics. This is the BBC reporting about something. So when you think about the SuperSources and you think about your flow design, if to Bill's point, if we took this and moved it up here, because you have a video here, it's kind of protecting this area. So this area here and this area here are very brandable. And so they did a good job here, but they didn't do as good a job down here of making that work as well.
Notice the upper right-hand corner. It's a Mac screen scrape.
No, that's not it. It's me.
Oh, is that yours?
That's mine because they're on all of them. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry.
This is we don't want to spend any money on our SuperSources by CNN. Where they're just like, we're not going to put any borders on them. We're not going to do anything else. We're just going to take the images and just stick them on top. And I will say when we talk about this as the background, wow, is that background moving fast? Like in real time, that is really, it's really sharp and it's designed to add energy, but I find that to be very, and then I know we're talking about SuperSources, but how many times can you repeat the same thing? Step and repeat backgrounds. So bad. Like CNN's design. Like it's functional, but like this is like the 80s called and they want their backgrounds back. And
what if the designer of this got upset because breaking news, the tornado is serious and you've got to put that up and there's no place for it in the design.
I look at Aaron Burnett and I'm like, you guys know you have somebody in the building that can do this well. Somebody's doing this well, and then we end up with this, And the thing is that you don't need to do this if you are controlling the space. If you are controlling the space, just put it here and put something else here. You don't have. If you're controlling the frame, step and repeat is when you don't control the frame. It's for when you're in press and there's a red carpet and people are walking in and you don't know where they're going to be pointing. So you want to make sure you get your branding in. Doing it on an insert is just. I think the technical term for that is kukaluka. I believe that is the technical term. Here's another version of it going fast. And so
I will say this, Alex, if you go back 2 examples of the 5-up with Wolf and the 4 people, and there we go. I have been in situations where you prep for one thing. You've done this. You prep for one thing, and at the last minute they go, "Oh, we have a 5th person."
Yeah, but this is, you have a design, when you're doing a show every day, you have a design for every possible version of this that they can do, and all you have to do, all I'm saying is it would be nice. Like, this is just, I find this to be like, this blends in so quickly into that background. All you need is a little light gray line, just 2 pixels wide, just going around it, just to separate it from the background. It's just like, and not look like you just haphazardly.
To your point, Chris, we have probably
there.
heard, Shallon's stuck in traffic. You got to go to 3 now.
Yeah, and then you go to 3. But the thing is that should be a button push. Yeah. Yeah, to do that.
Should, but sometimes things happen at the last minute.
I don't think that was a last minute thing. That's a design choice because they're all like that. Hold on. All of his stuff is 4 up. The 3 up. That's the design choice that whoever did the graphics for that just decided we're not putting borders on it. And I'm sure they did it because they decided it was easier to not do that, which is, again, when we look at this, it's easier. It's you can make great content, or you make it very watchable, or easy to make, easy to watch.
The screen, stretch it out.
Rarely twice. Yeah. So here you can see it kind of integrated in here. You can see these subtle lines that are kind of creating a separation. I kind of like what they do up here, where there's a little bit of a highlight, but there's this thin line that just kind of gives you some dimension, up here. Here's another one of those little highlights there. And again, this is the, this is a logo, lower third that's really designed to go with everything else that they're doing down here. So that's another one there. By the way, if you're wondering why there isn't any more Fox stuff, it was really hard to find SuperSources on Fox this morning. I couldn't find, I was wandering around trying to find them, and I was like, Fox does a pretty good job of design. And I just didn't get them in here this time. Now, here's something. This is a DVE move. It's not really a SuperSource, but it's kind of one. And one of the things I just wanted to show here is when you see that means they're really doing a graphic. They're not just cutting to something. They're really doing a graphic move. And you can do that. And one of the things that I do a lot to get that feel is using Mix Effect Pro inside of the ATEM, where you can have them all moving around and animated and so on and so forth. We didn't show as many of those here because they don't do them very often. And I realized because it's hard. I was like, oh, this is really easy with Mix Effect Pro, but it's hard to do it in most systems. So anyway, so that's what we have for some examples. So hopefully that drums up some thought process there. If you've got questions about those or ideas or comments about them, go ahead and throw them into Makana. Let's go to the first question.
First question comes from Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado. How could an Apple TV be included in the signal chain of SuperSource workflow?
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I find Apple TVs are the glue allowing many source types to connect into my ATEM. It allows my iPhone or my iPad to come in wirelessly. It also allows audio follow video when I need it. And even with an app, you can bring in NDI sources.
Yeah, and the main thing you want to think about as you start to cut through those, this gets into the, as you start to build those SuperSources, how many MEs do you have? And as you start to use SuperSources, you will get hungry for MEs. So that you want to be able to keep on switching what's in that group. So if you're doing the Apple TV or cut into something else, that's when you want to start having an ME that serves one or more of those SuperSources. That way you're not trying to redefine what's in that box. You're simply cutting. You can continue to cut. So that's one thing to think about there. As far as getting the Apple TV in, one of the other things you want to consider is that the Apple TV has HDCP, which is their security built in, and so sometimes it won't show up on the switcher because it's going, the switcher goes, I can't look at it, or it doesn't have a return code to make that work. There's a bug in some converters that are made in China that are usually the less expensive ones that will do the HDCP handshake. And then they just won't. Then they'll just pass it out SDI. She's like, there's no HDCP and SDI. So if you have an HDMI converter not like a good one, like a Blackmagic or AJA, but a cheap one. A lot of times it will just do the handshake and then it will just push out SDI out of it. And then if you convert it back to HDMI, it'll work just fine. Next question.
Dave Chalmers in Glasgow, Scotland says, how can I build a series of SuperSource presets on an ATEM 2ME to allow a custom quad split of different camera angles each time? ATEM Macros, and he's looking to automate this with QPilot for orchestral live streams, and he's got a link to the QPilot website.
I haven't used QPilot for this, but I will say that for almost anything that we're doing where we're defining a lot of super sources in ATEM, we're using MixEffect Pro. And, I think that's what you see. All the super sources that we do in this show and how we put those together are all using MixEffect Pro. Those are being defined by Isadora asking for MixEffect Pro to do certain things, and there's a lot of other bits and pieces to it. But it is really hard to use ATEM macros to define that. So what you want to think about is what I would recommend is thinking about how QPilot can interact with MixEffect Pro as opposed to QPilot talking directly to the ATEM with the macros. And the reason for that is that as you set up macros in an ATEM, you have to touch everything or it will just carry whatever setting it had before. And so the amount of touching that is required, you have to hit, what I mean by touching is you have to just move it up and down one thing so that it says this was changed. It's mind-numbing to do super sources where you have to make sure that absolutely every attribute that you were going to possibly change later has been touched for every macro. Or if you do them out of order, suddenly they don't do what you expect them to do because that setting wasn't changed, and it's super painful. Like it's and I wouldn't recommend ever using the built-in macro tools for super sources when I can use MixEffect Pro. It's $50 or something like that. I don't think is that what MixEffect Pro is? I think it's $50 or worth every penny. Like whatever it is, whatever that number is, it's worth every penny to do it to make that work. When we talk about super sources, if we're talking about ATEMs, don't even try them without it. I mean, you want to build those out, and it's so easy and so fast to do that. Just consider that part of the cost of buying the computer, and it'll work on an M1 or on an iPad. Next question.
Next question comes from Henry Ramos of Yonkers, New York. Where do you find tasteful backgrounds for your multi-box shots?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, you can find a lot of them. I mean, most of the big stock houses have backgrounds that are designed to do this. If you want to save some money, though, you can also make them, don't forget. And for me, that's a process of finding something, even with my iPhone. If I see something that I think is really pretty and I think would make a good background, let's say it's a plant that is kind of generally floating in the wind, I will shoot 30 seconds of that, bring it back onto my desktop, apply a boatload of Gaussian blur, even potentially slow-mo or things like that if I've shot it at enough frame rate to support that so it doesn't get jerky. And then you can turn it into a background that's just as good as the other ones out there, so you don't have to buy them, but there are certainly a lot of sources to buy them.
Yeah, so if you really want some of those, iStock Photo isn't a bad place to find them. You can find a lot of loops. So those are a variety of the stock companies will make loops that are just slowly moving. I believe the one that we have is iStock Photo. It might be something else. The Earth, where it is actually slowly moving. That's there. It's like a digital Earth, and I thought about building it, and then I thought about how long it would take to do that, and then I just didn't do that. so anyway, so if you but having something slowly looped there. I've been a real big fan of using Apple's Motion and Replicator because you can just set up a bunch of things that are just looping inside of Replicator that are designed to loop every 4 seconds or every 8 seconds. And that's the period in which they do whatever they're going to do in the Replicator. And what you do is you get a couple of them going. So one's repeating every 4 seconds, one's doing every 2 seconds, one's doing every 8 seconds. And they all kind of interact with each other, and so you end up with this kind of soft moving thing that never really feels like it's repeating. And the big thing with Motion is that you can build those loops without having to do any kind of weird funkiness. You can build them so that they stop and end at a certain time. So they're going to be loopable when you get to the other end. It's going to just automatically go back to it. So I built a lot of them inside of Motion because of that reason, just with a lot of basic shapes. The other thing you can do is go out and simply take footage of things that you're interested in, whether those are night lights or the ocean or close-ups or whatever, and then you can either drop it out of focus in the camera, or you can put it out of focus later. So those are all things that you can also put together that will work really well. So those are some of the ways that you can put those backgrounds together. But one of the best things to do as you look at these super sources is to really study them and figure out what makes the most sense. What do you like? Like when you look at a super source and you immediately go, oh, I really like that. What about it do you like? And try to really analyze that and figure out what you want to put back there. Next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota. What do you look for in a font for lower thirds? Are there colors to stay away from for text and fills?
Low contrast is hard for people. Generally, you'll find that almost all lower thirds are going to be white and black. They're as far as the text color, you may see some other colors there, but they generally have a fair bit of contrast between the two. And the other thing that you tend not to get too artsy about it. They tend to be, you're looking for, especially for a lower third, you're looking at readability. That's really an important piece of the puzzle as opposed to getting too creative. When people get too creative, it is harder for people to read it and get it, and B, it makes you look like you don't know what you're doing. like this is the first time when you see fonts that are super flowery and all this other stuff, and they've got all this animation, you're like, yeah, this is how it begins. This is how you're getting started. It's cute, and then people realize after a while that people just want to see what's going on. If you spend an enormous amount of money, you can make them really great and animated. So if you're looking at like NFL football, it's one thing. But one thing I will also say in general about a lot of these things is look at the amount of complexity that you're adding for the ROI. What is the value of coming back on, from doing that? And you want to be very careful of that, because you can when you make things complicated like that, you make everything much harder at every step. This gets back into why CNN stretches things up and down. Now, I don't recommend that, but I also recommend thinking about, like, if I add this change and suddenly, we had a client that wanted mortises, instead of the edges. They wanted mortises around every single super source, so that it was like they had like a very cybery kind of thing that they wanted around each one. In the Blackmagic world, it's pretty difficult. We ended up taking a switcher and running it 4 signals through the switcher, and keying them in, and then running that out into another switcher, so that we could and then we could animate them any way we wanted with mix effect. But it was not a trivial problem. And now and again, what you do, this gets into the interface. What you do does make a difference. Like in a TriCaster, that would be nothing. So there are things that we get limited by on ATEM that we may not get limited by in other platforms, especially software ones like vMix or OBS or TriCasters. Go ahead, Bill.
There's also, in typesetting, there's 2 different classes of fonts, serifed and sans serifed. Sans serif generally are the more slabby, blocky fonts. Serifs are the little edges and things like Times Roman and things like that make it a little easier to read on print pages, but they can be problems when it's mapped against a raster of video or something like that. In fact, all monitors tend to be rows of horizontal and vertical pixels. So if you use fonts that lean, if like you italicize things, you can get into some legibility problems, particularly as the fonts get smaller, because you're trying to map onto a vertical and horizontal raster, something that leans a little bit, so some of the edges along the way will get a little icky. So generally, most of these graphics you see try to stay away from serif fonts. They use sans serif fonts in relatively hard, as big size as you can get, and they often do some sort of edge on them that's a contrast, so that whether it's against a light background or a dark background, the font remains as readable as possible.
Go ahead, Chris.
In the early part of my career, I remember thinking, what was it like in the control room or the edit suite when they'd bring in some, 6-figure art director, and he'd say, okay, wait, I have an idea. I have a vision. Black background, white Helvetica, done. And I used to think that was just such a cop-out until you start thinking about it. And I will say, Tommy, here's what you want to do. Watch the documentary called Helvetica. Yeah. And the answer to your question is this. Helvetica is not a punchline. Comic Sans is a punchline.
Papyrus.
Papyrus is a short documentary. That's a short documentary on YouTube.
Generally speaking, do not use wedding invitation fonts if at all possible.
And it depends, of course, on your audience. But I tell you, 90% of the time, you can use Helvetica and be done with it. And nobody ever got fired for using Helvetica.
I prefer Helvetica Nu.
I would have said that, but I didn't know how to pronounce it. I've been using that font for 30 years. Yes.
That's actually a good lesson. How many times have they recut Helvetica? I mean, there's 35 versions of Helvetica.
Otherwise known as Arial.
Or,
right, exactly.
Do you know the story behind Arial, Alex? Where Arial came from?
Microsoft didn't want to pay for Helvetica.
Microsoft did not want to pay royalty or the licensing for Helvetica. Also, Gotham is a great font.
Excellent. We are, by the way, we're going to have a font, a typographer coming on in June. So we're excited to have her on. So stay tuned for that. We just, it took me a couple, anyway, it's a long story, but she's going to, she wrote a book that I have. And so we reached out, and so she's going to come on. So we'll talk more. We'll have a whole second hour about fonts. Next question.
Bob Sturdivant in San Antonio. Since the SuperSource is a Blackmagic product, are there other hardware devices that could be used like SuperSource?
Yeah, so every switcher, not every switcher, but almost every switcher has some version of this. So we're calling it SuperSources because a lot of us have ATEMs, but it is called 4-ups or 3-ups or multiple DVEs or there's many other words for them, but they are common in a switcher. So most software switchers, I think that, what are they called in vMix? Like vMix, OBS, Mimo, TriCasters, everybody has them, and they're, to be honest with you, they're more flexible in most of those locations because, Blackmagic hasn't done a lot with that, but it does produce it really well when you get it working, but that's why we're looking at it. So we're looking at it more from an art perspective. Of course, there are tools from Chiron and VizRT and Expression that can do a lot of these types of things as well from Ross. And so there's a lot of other things that build these tools in software that can make those work as well. And the hard part is sometimes the switcher only places the images and the graphics come up underneath it with a separate piece. And that's why a lot of times you don't see complex comps in a SuperSource. Like you don't see rounded. One thing you don't see very often on a SuperSource, I like to add them when I'm doing stuff, is like little rounded edges on the SuperSource, because that's harder, because most of the systems are putting they're putting the images over top of that and they're not integrated into it. And so it's giving them round edges is little things that are a little bit of added edge there. vMix calls them multi-view inputs or layered inputs. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael. Would an ATEM Mini Extreme ISO be a solid device to experiment with on SuperSources?
100%. Yeah, definitely we'll take those basic inputs. It doesn't have all the MEs that you might use for something in the future, but the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO, that's the big reason that you buy the Extreme over top of the basic, ISO system is, one of the big reasons is because you get SuperSources. Next question.
Xander Snell in Miami, Florida says, why is the stacking order on SuperSource boxes on the ATEM opposite to the order of keyers?
I'm sure there's a good reason. I don't know what it is. I'm sure that there was meetings and discussions about it. I don't know how they got there, but yeah, it's odd. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, how do most broadcasters create animated backgrounds for SuperSources?
A lot of them are probably created in After Effects, like that, After Effects or Motion or things, a lot of times they're built up. Those are usually pre-rendered. Very rarely are you going to have anything live rendered from the background. So typically those are going to be pre-rendered. There was a bunch of meetings and designs and people put them together. Next question. Here you go, Bill. You're going to, before you.
I was just going to briefly comment that a lot of the packages that you can buy from sources. I use Motion VFX a lot, but there are other packages for all sorts of different operating systems, and you can buy them initially, so you can get a background from that. But often they allow you to go in if you have the proper tools, and that could be After Effects or Motion or something, and they allow you to customize a lot of them. So if you have a background that you really like, except it doesn't have complementary colors to the corporate logos and things like that, you actually have access, if you buy one of their packages, to go in, change the code to change the colors and things like that. So I can't tell you the number of times that I've needed a background, and so I found one that I really liked, that it was everything, but it was wrong in some ways, and I just dive down into it, open it in Motion, and fix it.
And then I will say that's one of the things I love about motion VFX is that they are motion files. So you can go in and you take an incredible amount of knowledge that they already have about how to build these motion files. I mean, those things are master classes. The only files that I get that are more impressive than motion VFX is when Alex Gollner sends me something. Alex Gollner is like he's at another level. But other than Alex Gollner, he sends me these just the functionality of the motion documents that he sends, what they can do and how he builds them, kind of blows my mind. But motion VFX is one that I learn a lot from. I open those things up and I bought more of theirs than I've gotten Alex to do stuff for me. So that's the only reason. But they're both of those are really great. We need to get Alex has done a couple labs that have been just amazing. We're going to do more of those. Let's go to the next question.
Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. Can you get more apparent mix effects by connecting several ATEM minis together, stringing one output from one into one of the next one's inputs?
Go ahead, Chris.
Dave, what you're looking for is the new Blackmagic Novum switcher. Novum is Latin for 9. They box 8 ATEM Mini Extreme ISOs into a box with a 9th one, and you can plug all 8 into the 9th one, and now you have SuperSource Nirvana. It's the Blackmagic Novum kit. You should look it up. I think it's on the website.
Does that actually exist? I don't think it's April 1st.
Of course
is a little
not.
late. April 1st is a little late.
I still have the tab open that says, what is Latin for 9?
Yeah, exactly. I was just like,
Alex, weren't you trying to build something like that?
I have built it. The reason I was like, did they actually package it? Because I have built up to 5 ATEM the minis, up to 5 of them together. And what you would do there is you would get. Now, here's the problem with that, by the way, since we've got a moment to talk. So the real problem you get into when you can build a 4ME, basically a 4ME switcher, and what you need is one of them really wants to be a Mini Extreme, because the Mini Extreme is the one that needs to build that SuperSource together. But if you want multiple MEs to be feeding into that, now if you had a bunch of Extremes, then you just stack them all up, and you could have exactly what Chris was talking about. You have 9 of them. You might not actually need 9 because you still want lower thirds and some other things. So you might need really 6 or 7 of them. But anyway, you stack all their outputs, into each other. And the problem really is when I built the one with 5 of them, 4 of them, the problem really was like pushing things at the same time, because you want to go from this to this to this to this. So I realized what you really need to do is sit back and use Companion or something else where you abstract the controls of the switchers so that you're telling both switchers to do something a millisecond apart, like just to do do this instruction set. So then you could be cutting, and you would theoretically build something that was 16 or 12 or 16 inputs with a bunch of MEs and things. And if you did it with an Extreme, you would have a 64 input 8 ME 8. You could build something that was totally absurd. I've been trying to get Blackmagic. I'm waiting for the new Mini Extreme to come out, and the reason for it is that it'll make all the old ones. I'm not saying there is one. I'm waiting for whenever it comes out. Get myself in trouble. I don't know of anything coming out there, but I've been waiting for a new one to come out so that the old ones are obsolete, so I can call Blackmagic and say, hey, can I borrow 8 of them for something totally stupid and absurd? And when the new SDI one came out, I was like, oh, I could do it now. I could build it to be all with SDI, and I don't have to deal with all these HDMI cables. Yeah, someday.
Ask them for the Novum package. And by the way, I'm offended that you're trying to tell me what I do or do not need. I think I need this. I need a 64 input switcher.
I think it would be great. I think it would be fantastic. I want to do it not because we should, but just because we could, we haven't done it yet, but it's a bucket list for us to put together. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles. Could John Preto demo his office hours SuperSource?
Go ahead, John.
So this is all built in OBS version 29, and boy, does it crush my CPU. It's at 170 right now. And this is like 12 layers. See, what's really interesting is that I came from the TriCaster and from the software switching world.
Right.
And so I'm used to the layer paradigm in like Photoshop.
Right.
And so when you build scenes in OBS, it's super easy to follow the paradigm of layers. Then I bought my first ATEM and I said, what is this? This is craziness. I can't easily build things like I did on Software Switcher. And
Right.
so that took that, and load videos out of the media pool, which to me just is silly. Doesn't make any sense. This is Helvetica. So Chris made me change the font on this. This is basically a ripoff of CNN. So the background is built in After Effects. The spinning bug is built in After Effects. The border around the background is Photoshop gradient. You see it's gradient. It's a gradient effect in Photoshop. So this was a lot of work to put this together. The SuperSource on the right-hand side is a video running capture of office hours, and then my live feed of the camera. So this took a little while to put together. All the white box and the red box are built into OBS, so you can build those boxes, make them transparent or whatever. And then the crawl on the bottom is a feature out of OBS too. That's breaking news from 1985. FTP is defined. VisiCalc is acquired by Lotus.
That's great.
But it takes a lot of CPU, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Is it hard
absolutely.
to get the news feed from 19? From
He's got a guy.
Is it
back
on the
there.
Wayback Machine?
Is there an
There's a
RSS
guy.
feed that's on a delay? How does that work, John?
I've always wanted to do historical ones where you just have like the go back like 800 years and just have or 2,000 years, and it's just like,
Have you seen? There's a Twitter.
we have an
feed.
uprising in Jerusalem, and there's a guy down there who's causing a lot of trouble, and there's the whole
Have fake
be
pundits weighing in on whether Caesar will win or not.
Is being indicted. Hey,
he's been indicted.
There's a Twitter feed that's from like 1945 or 1944, and it follows World War II as though it was being tweeted. It's very interesting.
I do think that it's too bad that social media is going to die soon. So, but it'd be really fun to. I always thought that it'd be fun for different TV shows to. The best one I've seen so far is Tar. TAR. From the fictional actress. Oh, I ruined it for everybody. The fictional actress Tar has a Twitter account. And she complains about things. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they were doing it up into the Oscars where she just complains like, hey, I'm not, like I didn't get invited and I didn't, but they did it in the voice of the fictional character. And I feel like there's just so many opportunities both for history as well as, I could see, I think that what you're talking about with World War II, but having a historical one where you kind of get a sense of what people would have been thinking or what they would have said in those different times. And again, newscasts, I think would be interesting to talk about those things and how would they be covered and how would they be talked about in this format. It'd be fun. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's weighing in on what we just did, what Preto just did. John, I love the graphics you created. Was that all in Mimo Live?
John?
All done in OBS. I have Wirecast. And what's interesting is this latest version of Wirecast is finally stable on the Macintosh platform. And so I've been using a combination.
Nice.
I have this same SuperSource running in Wirecast and in OBS. This particular one right now is running in OBS version 20.
To translate, when John says OBS, he means OBS.
Oh, that Chris made that up. That just stuck with me. I don't know why I say that. So, but a lot of the stuff, After Effects, the background's After Effects, the spinning bug on the bottom in 3D is After Effects, and then the little gray border around the top is a Photoshop gradient.
How do you make it so that you're wearing a different shirt in the big box and the little box to the right?
Magic. It's magic.
Amazing.
It's Midjourney. It's synthetic AI.
I do think that when Midjourney is able to do video, the opportunities for SuperSource backgrounds will explode.
Have you seen, by the way, Alex, did you notice Mike Seymour posted a thing on Twitter, I think just yesterday, and he's using an app called like Respeecher or Relipper or something.
Yeah, Respeecher.
And he walks out, and then another guy walks out next to him, and the other guy starts talking, and Mike is standing there not moving his lips.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy's lips make Mike's lips move.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's creepy.
So the tech there
is that the end of, well, I saw it on video, it must be true?
That should have ended about 30 years ago. But anyway, so like that was never super accurate.
He said it on camera. I saw it.
I know. We should not have been using that as evidence for as long as we did. So anyway, there's so many things. Yeah, there's so many things wrong with using camera and video as evidence is got a whole hallmark, just a whole slew of issues. Anyway, but what's interesting about that, I think we've talked about a little bit in some of the shows that you weren't here because you didn't come to all the shows that we did, so you haven't heard the discussion about it. But yeah, Chris, I'm not, not guilty.
Guilt and shame. I don't buy into your guilt and shame.
Anyway,
Lindsay.
so the thing is that what we're talking about there, this is what happens to producers. If you run out of questions and we still have a couple minutes, we'll just sit there and finish our kind of conversation. Anyway, so one of the things that's happening in Hollywood is figuring out this respeech. The respeech is just massive. So one of the things that I was talking to someone about last time I was in LA was that what they're working on is the technology to allow you to. The first technology that you're seeing is them being. I think respeecher is the one they're using. Is someone said a swear word and they couldn't get an R. They couldn't get a PG-13 rating or they couldn't get an R rating. I can't remember which one they were trying to get down to. And so the person needed to not swear, but they don't have another take. And so they literally just used it to replace her voice so that she would just say something that wasn't a swear word. And it sounds like her. It's totally embedded into the sound. It didn't need, they were able to fix it so that it was able to get step down into it. But they're showing examples of this. And one of the things that they're looking at is the concept of, it won't be the next Mission Impossible, but they were using Mission Impossible, is that people really want Tom Cruise to be saying all the words in every language. And they have actors that are just the Tom Cruise of Brazil, the Tom Cruise of Germany, the Tom Cruise. But they said, like that's their job. Like when Tom Cruise does movies, they get hired to do, they do a lot of other things, but that's one of their like verticals. Is the person that does Tom Cruise in Brazil is always the same guy because he sounds mostly like Tom Cruise and he can emote it and everything else. But they said that what's next is that they're going to have Tom Cruise. They'll still have someone saying all those words to get the pronunciation. They're not even sure how long that'll be required. And what they'll do is they'll take AI, analyze his voice, analyze what he's saying, change the words to another language, rebuild his vocals saying those words, and then realign his mouth to match the dubbing that's being done by the AI. And I was like, wow, that's going to be amazing in 10 years. They're like, 10 years, 2, like 2 years, like they said, whether we do it or not, they said the tech is going to be done in 2 years. And it's, they said, there's a bunch of people that are, weirds people out. So we're not sure exactly when it'll come out, but they've got it working already, and so it's kind of an amazing, because it's a lot easier for them because if you're working with the film, with the industry, there's a track that's the vocal track, so they can just take that out. They don't have to try to fit it into all the other environmental stuff and everything else. And so they said inside of that, it'll look identical. It'll just look like he said it, like in that other language, and it will be 60 languages, and they'll all feel like they were the same. And that's also the same thing. Like it's going to the thing was brought up. It's going to revolutionize Hong Kong. All the old Hong Kong movies that are all the martial arts movies are going to be never the same. Like they're all gonna say the words in English, and it's just gonna look like it's in English. But I do think that AI is going to be one of the most transformational thing that's going to come from AI is not being limited by language. Like we're just gonna not think about not being able to, everything will just be read in the language that you can read it in. It's not, and it's coming really fast. So anyway, it's a fascinating thing. Anyway.
Chris, anything negative to say? Come on, you can.
I have plenty of negatives to say, but can I revisit? There was a question earlier. It said, does the panel want to discuss what they're currently working on? So
Yeah, sure.
I'm working on this piece. I'm just going to say this. I'm working on a piece for a client, and I was charged with doing the content edit. And there's a moment in that video that is the very best part of the video. It's this transitional moment in it. And the comment I got back from the client was, I think we should remove this content at about, and she gives the time code. And I'm like, really? Okay. It's literally the best part of the video. Yeah, we don't need that. Corporate video is horrible.
It's the here's the thing is that
maybe that one moment is showing how bad the rest of it is.
What I'll say is that the corporate video is the best and the worst all at the same time. You know, like I don't really like. I've worked in film and I've worked in corporate and I've worked in a lot of other things, and I will say that, you know, there's both a level of flexibility in corporate in a lot of ways that you don't get in TV or film. You know, where people have told you what to do and we're just going to do it this way, and there's a lot of money running on this and whatever. In corporate, at least for the social, you know, for the companies that I worked with, there was kind of pie in the sky, like, let's create something new. Like, let's do something no one's ever done before, and we'll just make stuff up. And I think that was a lot of fun in a way that we didn't get to see very often in film and TV. There was a lot of rules that we had to kind of live inside of. And so I think that we were able to experiment a lot more. And, you know, a lot of times I just felt like when you worked in film and TV, you would do incredibly hard work and somebody would yell at you invariably, like about something. Because a lot of times it had nothing, it mostly had to do with they're going to ask you for money back or they're going to want a discount. And it has nothing to do with the quality of your work. They just have to yell at you at the end so that you can, so that they can then have their assistant call and say, we want 10% off or 15% off or whatever. I mean, it was a very typical Hollywood thing to do. And, you know, you're getting we just used to call it the shakedown. It's like, here comes the shakedown, you know, like, you know, and so we kind of, you know, became very thick skinned about that. And which is why I don't do a lot of work for Hollywood producers, but in corporate, everyone was always so excited. Like, we did something crazy and they'd be like, this is amazing. And so it was a lot of fun. But they do things like cut the best parts out of things all the time. Like, they just, because it's not what they have, some little list of the things that they're trying to cover, and then they have some arbitrary amount of time they want it to fill, and there's no reason for it to fill that time. There's no real limit to it. But they've have some arbitrary thing like, this has to be 6 minutes long, or this has to be 8 minutes long. And you see that across the industry. I mean, like, the pod race was too long at 22 minutes and too short at 7.5 minutes, which is what you saw in the film, and 11 minutes. 11 minutes was the best. So anyway, we covered, I just want to thank everybody. Thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. And thank you to the producers. It's great to have all these great questions and keeping the conversation moving forward. And of course, thanks to the incredible team on the back end that's making all of this happen every single day. It's quite a thing. So, and we had a great, I was really worried that we weren't going to have a lot of people show up, but we had a great the volunteer meetings are becoming really fun. That's the first Saturday of every month. We're going to be doing these volunteer meetings where they're a little bit of an orientation, a lot of just us talking about volunteering and talking about what's going on and what the opportunities are. And I have a lot of fun with them. So anyway, and I'm just really present to what a great group of people that have come together to do this. So it's really, really amazing. So anyway,
speaking of volunteers, can I put in a plug for the 3:00 meeting today for readers, if anybody's interested in exploring that? 3:00.
3:00 in after hours. Yeah. And Bill will work with the readers. So if you're interested in reading's just a really great way to get good at reading, get good at presenting yourself, it's a good practice. So I would highly recommend checking that out. We traveled 53,000 miles, a relatively relaxed day, 86,000 kilometers, 425 million bananas for scale. And a reminder, the Reader Workshop is at 3:00. And tomorrow, Glenn Sanders from Zaxcom is going to be on. He's going to tell us all about what makes Zaxcom special. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
Come back tomorrow if you want to hear more stories about what infuriates me in post-production.
Why don't we make that a second hour? We should make a second hour. The
I've
things that drive us crazy. Why have we not done that? That's a Friday. That's a Friday session. Or maybe a Monday. We'll have to ask.
Is that the classic? Is this a bug or a feature?
No, it's just infuriating.
All the things we hate about that. I don't think we can broadcast that, because
you can only do it
at
a certain point in your career when you're like,
when you're
okay.
When you're okay, sick, really have nothing to lose.
I have no more work coming in. Oh well, that was inevitable. Knew that was happening.
Yeah, that's what my dad used to say. He goes, people are going to pick at me when I get out of the courtroom. He goes, but I'm just an old sick cougar with
Can we have your dad as a guest someday?
We should. I'm actually working on getting a place for him to do it from. So yeah, he's funny. Just you're not allowed to ask for